8:32 and a potential trade war averted, at least for now, with Canada and Mexico. But a 10% tariff on goods from China is now in effect.
So the impact on New Yorkers could add up to thousands of dollars.
At a time when families are so frustrated, with the cost of everything so high, and inflation has been so cruel to them, now to be facing, and I've read different economists' estimates, anything from $1,300 to $3,300 for a family of four in higher costs, we have to stand up and say this is wrong.
So President Trump is expected to hop on a call in the coming days with Chinese President Xi Jinping. But until then, how much will these tariffs actually cost us? Well, here to do the math is NYU economics professor Joseph Foudy. Professor, thanks so much for being with us this morning. I appreciate your time. First, I want to ask you, 10% doesn't seem so bad when you look at 25%, but can you kind of give us the big picture on how much this will affect our wallets?
Yeah, so I mean, China's likely to let its currency sort of depreciate to offset this as well. I think the problem is in a world where we're just recovering from this sort of bout of inflation, every little piece adds up. And, you know, New York alone imports about $20 billion worth of goods from China a year. That's in everything you buy at a local Target. The other thing to remember is every company that competes with those Chinese imports, we know from past experience, if they have to raise their price by $1, those competing companies use that as an excuse to raise their prices as well. And, you know, that really hits people who are, you know, working class. If you think about, you know, who spends the most on clothing, furniture, toys, the worst.
You know, and pretty soon we'll see the sticker impact on the shelves too. More than half of the shoes sold in the U.S. are made in China. How quickly could we see the price of shoes, for example, go up?
Yeah, so my guess is we'll start to see that in a couple of weeks. And remember, the other 50% that comes from other countries, you know, they're likely to use this as an excuse to raise them as well. Now, the good news is if you buy a $200 sort of pair of Air Jordans, it might only be imported at you know, $20 or $30, so that the tariff is not going to hit you as hard as you think. But again, it adds up. The other thing we know is, you know, companies are always faster to raise prices than lower them. So we may start to see sort of a reaction faster than we think.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sneakers. I mean, what if your kid plays sports? Yeah. How much is that going to affect?
Yeah, that's going to hit you on all of that equipment that's imported. The other thing to remember too is, you know, New York actually produces sports equipment. Those firms are importing raw materials. And what you're going to see is that, like, that's actually going to hit some employment in the cost of stuff that we buy locally. You know, New York has firms that are selling stuff across the world and across the rest of the U.S.
Yeah, but we need those materials. That's the issue. Yeah.
You know, another big concern, too, is the perhaps potential tariffs from Mexico and Canada. 30-day pauses on both of them for now. But that could impact food that comes through the Bronx. Hunt's Point, when you talk about the markup on the shoes alone, with food, with that higher tariff rate, how could that impact consumers?
Yeah, so that's going to hit you as well. And obviously, you know, what you spend at a grocery store is something that you see every week coming out of your paycheck. The tariffs on Canada, if they go into effect, that's far, far more significant. That's 25%. But also, we have an integrated supply chain with Canada. We're importing and exporting 20 billion plus on both sides a year. And if you think about it, we're not competing with Canada. We might have aluminum or steel that we send to Canada that's turned into a part that comes back, is turned into a transmission at, say, Borgwater Automotive upstate, that then goes into a car in Canada sent to the U.S.
Yeah.
And we're importing cars from Canada, and a 25% hit on that also means every competing car company raises the prices. And we're just recovering from this, you know, kind of global surge in car prices.
Would you say that a hit or a tariff on Mexico, or no, of Canada, would be worse than the effect on Mexico?
I think just because we're so integrated. To put this in perspective, we think there could be 500,000 jobs in New York State that are tied to firms in Canada. It's really Canada and New York sort of as an integrated supply chain, aluminum, actually jewelry, since, you know, Valentine's is coming up, between Canada and the Diamond District. It's in things like aluminum. By the way, our exports to China, New York doesn't export as much as we import, but we have, I think, like $250 million of things like GPS equipment, microscopes, all made by companies in New York that we don't even think about, all of which are going to face retaliatory tariffs.
You know, this White House aside, is it common or uncommon for an administration to impose tariffs over things like border issues or fentanyl as a way to sort of get them on our side on certain issues?
Yeah, so it's unusual because we normally don't link trade to these other areas. And it's important to understand as well that, like, with the Trump administration, to the extent that you're using tariffs to say, urge Mexico to crack down on the border, like if the tariffs don't actually go into effect, that actually is could be a clever and strategic use. The problem is if you have to actually enact the tariffs, they turn out to be far more costly than we imagine.
Yeah.
Does it become perhaps an empty threat to threaten tariffs that aren't followed through for long periods?
Yeah, and that's a challenge too, because then you might actually be forced to impose a tariff you don't really want, because sometimes when someone calls your bluff, you have to enact it.
Right.
The other, final thing is, obviously with Mexico, you could imagine this being linked to a deal on the border. It's unclear to me what we're asking Canada to do, and sort of what a trade deal would even look like.
Yeah. Well, Professor Foudy, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your insight with us. Appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
And breaking this all down, thanks so much.